The accusation landed like a grenade. Gerald Marsh, silver-haired, expensive suit, the kind of confidence that only comes from never having been told no, lifted a single printed document and turned to face the judge like he was delivering a verdict he had already written himself. "Your Honor," he said, smooth as oil on water, "we have discovered that attorney Vanessa Coleman submitted a fabricated email as evidence in these proceedings." The courtroom in Seoul didn't erupt immediately. It went silent first. That particular silence, the kind that happens right before something irreversible, pressed down on every person in the room. Then the whispers came. Vanessa heard them. She always did. "She doesn't belong here." They hired a black American to defend a Korean empire? She had heard versions of those words her entire life. In courtrooms in Chicago. In boardrooms in New York. In conference rooms where she was the only person who looked like her and everyone's eyes said the same thing their mouths were too polished to say out loud. She knew how to stand inside those words without letting them move her. But this was different. She stood at the defense table alone, back straight, hands resting calmly in front of her. Anyone watching from the gallery might have thought she was unbothered. Only she knew what it cost to look that way. Because if this accusation held, if the judge believed what Marsh was selling, it wasn't just her career ending today. It was Chairman Sung-Jin Park's life work. It was hundreds of employees. It was everything she came here to protect. The document was passed to the judge. His face tightened. Across the room, the Park Group board sat in a row like men already calculating how fast they could walk away from her. She could feel their eyes doing the math. Daniel Park sat among them. Rigid. Jaw tight. Face unreadable. Marsh let the silence breathe before he finished it off. "This email proves that attorney Vanessa Coleman fabricated evidence to mislead this court. We ask that she be immediately removed and her conduct referred for disciplinary review." The judge reached for his gavel. And then a chair scraped across the marble floor. Loud. Deliberate. Every head turned. Chairman Sung-Jin Park, 80 years old, the man who had built a billion-dollar empire from rubble, rose slowly from his seat. The room expected him to speak, to distance himself, to protect the Park name by throwing her under the weight of it. Instead, he looked around the courtroom with a quiet, devastating expression of a man who had just seen something beneath his dignity to witness. Then he turned and walked out. No statement, no explanation, just the soft sound of his shoes on the floor and the weight of a heavy door closing behind him. The courtroom fractured. The judge's gavel came down 3 times. Vanessa stood completely still, staring at the door where the most powerful man in the room had just disappeared. She didn't know if she had been abandoned or protected. She didn't know which one would hurt more. Then Daniel stood up. He straightened his jacket and followed his father out. She was alone at the table now. The courtroom was chaos around her. Cameras raised. Whispers sharpening into full sentences. The opposing team watching her the way hunters watch something already caught. She didn't move. Because no one in that courtroom, not the judge, not the press, not even his own son, understood why Chairman Park walked out. And that was exactly what he was counting on. If you believe a woman's dignity is worth fighting for, you're in the right place. Some stories go beyond the events themselves. They reveal the courage it takes to stand firm, to hold on to your dignity, and to insist on respect, even when others try to take it away. If you've ever faced a moment that challenged your courage, or refused to be bought, silenced, or pushed aside, then you're exactly where you belong. This channel shares stories about women who refuse to be broken, and about the people who eventually discover, sometimes too late, that integrity is something money can never buy. Welcome to Afro Korean Storytime. 3 months earlier, Vanessa Coleman was losing sleep over a man named Marcus Webb. Not romantically. Marcus Webb was 43 years old, a school custodian from the south side of Chicago who had filed a workplace discrimination complaint and lost his job for it. His case was worth almost nothing in financial terms. It would generate no headlines. No one from any corporate firm was going to call her about it. But Marcus had 2 daughters and a quiet kind of dignity that people had spent years trying to dismantle, and Vanessa was not going to let them finish the job. This was her practice. Small, respected, underfunded, built entirely around the belief that law existed to protect people, not just money. Corporate firms had come for her before, offers that would have changed her life, her apartment, her entire financial reality. She had turned down every single one. On a Tuesday afternoon that felt like every other Tuesday, her assistant flagged an international call. A senior partner from a Seoul-affiliated firm explained the situation without wasting words. The Park Group, one of South Korea's largest conglomerates, was facing a coordinated legal attack from a group of American investors trying to seize control of the company. They needed outside counsel. Someone without political ties to either side. Someone clean. Vanessa almost said no before he finished the sentence. Corporate power struggles were not her world. She knew how to fight for the person in the room with the least power, not the billion-dollar entity in the room with the most. But she asked for the files anyway. She read through the night. By morning, she could see it clearly. This wasn't a legitimate lawsuit. It was a weapon. A coordinated legal attack designed to exhaust the Park Group financially and reputationally until they had no choice but to sell. The mechanism was sophisticated and the scale was enormous, but the underlying cruelty was something she recognized immediately. She had seen it before, just never at this size. She called back and said yes. In Seoul, the news moved through Park Group headquarters like a cold current. Daniel Park heard it before the official announcement. An American lawyer. A civil rights lawyer. Not a corporate litigator with international credentials and a wall full of M&A victories. A civil rights attorney from Chicago. He went directly to his father's office. Chairman Park was standing at the window, looking out over the city, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't turn around when Daniel came in. Daniel spoke carefully, the way you speak to a man whose approval has shaped every decision you've ever made. He raised his concerns respectfully. He suggested the case required someone with direct corporate litigation experience at the international level. His father was quiet for a long moment. I have hired corporate lawyers before, he said finally, still facing the window. They protected the company. I want someone who will protect what the company stands for. The conversation was over. Daniel walked out without another word, because there was nothing left to say. His father had made his decision. In the Park family, that was the beginning and the end of the discussion. When Vanessa arrived at Park Group headquarters, the boardroom went quiet in that particular way she had learned to read over 2 decades of walking into rooms where people had already decided who she was. She set her briefcase down and opened the meeting without waiting to be introduced. She told them she had read the filings, the financial records, and the deposition transcripts. She had 3 initial questions. She would like to begin. The room didn't warm to her, but it paid attention. Daniel met with her afterward. Polished, precise, courteous in the way that keeps a wall intact while technically being civil. Before she left, he said quietly, "In my family, outsiders do not survive long." Vanessa picked up her briefcase. "Good thing I didn't come here to survive." She walked out. What she didn't know was that somewhere in that building, someone had already photographed the contents of her case files. Before she ever reached her hotel. Back in the courtroom, the judge was still examining the email. Gerald Marsh stood at the front of the room with the patience of a man who had already won. Arms loose at his sides. Expression neutral. No anxiety. No performance. Just the quiet stillness of someone waiting for a conclusion they had already engineered. That stillness was the thing that caught Vanessa's attention. She had faced enough opposing counsel to know what a lawyer looked like when they had made a risky move. There was always something, a tightness around the jaw, a careful overcorrection in posture, something that said, "I hope this holds." Marsh had none of it. A lawyer who had just filed a false accusation in open court and felt nothing should not be trusted. He felt nothing because he was certain. And he was certain because the email had been built to last. Which meant whoever built it had known exactly what she had. Which meant the leak was not a guess. It was ongoing. It was close. And she had just handed them her most important discovery. 3 months earlier in Seoul, Vanessa had begun working methodically. The lawsuit rested on 3 central claims. She mapped each one on a wall in her hotel suite and started pulling threads at 4 in the morning because sleep had always been optional when something needed solving. Within the first week, she found 2 significant irregularities in the opposing team's financial documentation. The numbers weren't falsified, they were curated. Selectively arranged to create a false picture without technically lying. It was skilled, expensive legal work. The kind that doesn't get done without specific inside knowledge of what the defense would be looking for. She requested the full internal communications archive from Daniel. He delivered it with a complete index and the particular edge in his voice she was beginning to recognize, the sound of a man who expected her to ask for something unnecessary and had prepared to be right about her. She needed exactly what she asked for. Working through the archive, she found the pattern. Certain internal emails, sensitive ones, strategically valuable ones, appeared in the opposing team's filings before they should have been accessible through discovery. By days. Sometimes by weeks. Someone was feeding information from inside the company. She brought it to Daniel. His first response was defensive. The Park Group's internal security was airtight. She was inventing a problem because it was easier than addressing the real legal issues. She laid the timeline on the table between them and said nothing. He stared at it. She watched the moment land, the shift in his expression when a man who has been certain of something is forced to become uncertain instead. It was not comfortable to watch. She didn't look away. "Who else knows about this?" he said. "Right now. Just us." That evening Vanessa attended a formal dinner hosted by Chairman Park. She had prepared carefully. Not just legally. She had spent her first nights in Seoul reading, not about tourist customs, but about the real texture of Korean formal culture. How seniority moved through a room. How disagreement could be expressed without ever raising a voice. How silence meant entirely different things depending on who was holding it. She bowed correctly when introduced to the elders. She waited to be seated. She listened far more than she spoke. She used the formal honorific she had practiced until it stopped feeling like a performance. Chairman Park noticed. Not loudly. He was not a man who announced his observations. But across the table, Vanessa caught him watching her with a quality of attention that was different from what she had been receiving from everyone else. The board watched her like a variable they hadn't accounted for. Daniel watched her like a problem he was managing. Chairman Park watched her like he was reading something he found genuinely interesting. As the gathering wound down, he paused beside her chair without announcing the moment. "My company was built in rooms where people believed I did not belong either," he said. He moved on before she could respond. She sat with that sentence long after the dinner ended. Back in her hotel suite, she opened her secure laptop to review the documents she had flagged earlier. The file structure had changed. Subtle. A timestamp slightly off. A document accessed that she hadn't opened since her first day. Someone was inside her case, and she had just documented the most critical evidence she had found. This channel is for women who have learned the hard way that dignity matters. If that sounds like you, subscribe. These are the stories we tell here. The judge asked Gerald Marsh to specify exactly what the alleged forged email was meant to prove. Marsh answered without hesitation. The email purported to show that a Park Group executive, using Vanessa's access credentials, had backdated a financial authorization to create a false paper trail. In plain language, It was designed to look like Vanessa had helped the Park Group manufacture evidence and then covered it up. The judge looked at Vanessa. She met his gaze without moving, because she knew something Marsh didn't know she knew yet. The email had been built using real metadata from her actual credentials. This wasn't a crude fabrication. It was technically sophisticated work, the kind that required deep, sustained access to Park Group's internal systems. The kind of access someone would need to maintain for months. Weeks earlier, somewhere over the Pacific at 2 in the morning, the careful professional distance between Vanessa and Daniel had begun to dissolve. Not dramatically. The cabin was dark and quiet. They had been working for 3 hours in silence when Daniel set down his documents, looked out the window into the nothing outside, and said, not quite to her, not quite to himself, "My father built this company when Korea was still rebuilding from the war. He kept workers on payroll through 3 recessions because he believed a company's first obligation is to the people inside it. I have spent my entire life trying to be worthy of that." Vanessa was quiet. Then she said, "My mother cleaned offices in downtown Chicago for 22 years. She used to say, the building doesn't care who cleans it, but the people inside it should." Something shifted. Not loudly, not with any announcement, just a small, quiet rearrangement of how they occupied the same space. They returned to their documents, but the wall had a crack in it now. Back in Seoul, the evidence work was painstaking. Vanessa was building a case showing that the American investors had coordinated their legal strategy with a contact inside the Park Group. The financial discrepancies pointed to it. The document leak confirmed it. But she needed something harder, a direct, traceable connection. Daniel began reviewing board communications from the past 18 months. One evening he called her to his office without explanation. When she arrived, he was standing at his desk, staring at his screen. His face had gone to that particular stillness, the controlled expression of a man holding something difficult very carefully, the way you hold something fragile you cannot afford to drop. He turned the screen toward her. A photograph. His cousin Ji-ho at a private dinner in Manhattan. Across the table, 2 senior executives from the American investment group bringing the lawsuit. The dinner had taken place 6 weeks before the lawsuit was filed. Vanessa looked at the image, then at Daniel. His jaw was tight. He was not a man who showed pain easily, but it was there, in the set of his shoulders, in the way he wasn't quite looking at her. She understood what she was watching. It was the moment a man finds out that someone he loved has been using that love as cover. She didn't rush past it. She let him have the moment. Then she said, quietly, "How many board meetings has Ji-ho attended since the lawsuit was filed?" Daniel closed his eyes briefly. All of them. Every strategy session. Every internal discussion. Every move they had made with the assumption they were protected. Ji-ho had been in the room for all of it. That night Vanessa sent the photograph and financial records to her forensic accountant in Chicago with a note that said, "Find the money. I need it in 72 hours." She sat at the small desk in her hotel room and looked out at the Seoul skyline. For a moment, just one, she let herself feel the weight of it. Not the legal complexity. Not the professional stakes. The personal weight of being the one person in the building that nobody trusted, working to protect people who had questioned her right to be there from the moment she walked in, now carrying a secret that could detonate an entire family. She pressed her palms flat on the desk. Then she opened the next file. The betrayal wasn't just inside the Park family. It was sitting at the board table. And it had been there the whole time. The judge gave Vanessa 15 minutes to respond to the accusation. 15 minutes to either produce something that dismantled Marsh's entire case or watch her career end in a Seoul courtroom in front of cameras from 2 continents. She sat down. She opened the briefcase Daniel had brought back with him when he returned from the hallway. She looked at the documents inside. She had 15 minutes. She started reading. 3 weeks earlier, The pressure inside Park Group had reached a boiling point. 3 senior board members had pulled Daniel aside privately. The press coverage in Korea was turning. The family's reputation was at risk. A Black American woman at the center of a Korean corporate crisis was, in their words, a distraction the company could not afford. They were careful about how they said it. They were not cruel men. They were frightened men. And frightened men reach for the familiar when the unfamiliar is costing them something. They told Daniel, "Let her go. Quietly. With full compensation. Find a Korean firm. Manage the optics before the optics manage the family." Daniel sat with it for 24 hours without telling her. Then he called. It was past midnight. She was in her hotel suite with documents spread across every surface, reading by lamplight, a half-eaten container of room service getting cold beside her laptop. He told her about the board meeting. She waited. He said, "I told them no." She asked why. The pause that followed was not the pause of a man searching for words. It was the pause of a man deciding how honest to be. "Because you're right," he said. "And being right matters more than being comfortable." She didn't respond immediately. She turned the lamp slightly toward the window without thinking about it, the way you adjust something physical when something internal just shifted. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just win." 3 days after that call, her forensic accountant in Chicago delivered 11 transfers over 14 months. Jiho's private holding company routing funds to a shell entity connected to the American investment group. He hadn't just been leaking documents. He had been on payroll. Vanessa read the report twice, methodically. Then she called Daniel and asked him to come to her hotel. He arrived in 20 minutes, which told her something about where he had been when she called. She laid everything on the table without preamble. The transfers, the timeline, Jiho's communication pattern mapping perfectly against every significant leak to the opposing legal team. Daniel stood very still. She watched him carry the weight of it, what it meant for his father, for the family name, for the public face of a dynasty that had been built on honor and had quietly been sold from the inside. She gave him time. "If I take this to my father," he said finally, "it will destroy Jiho." "Yes," she said. "Jiho grew up in this house. My father treated him like a second son." "I know." He looked at her. "How do you do it? Carry someone else's destruction and not flinch?" "I flinch," she said. "I just do it where no one's watching." Something moved across his face. Not pity. Something closer to recognition. She pressed forward. "If you don't bring this to your father, the company falls and Jiho walks away with money he earned by selling people who trusted him. That's your other option." He walked to the window. She waited. "In Korean culture," he said quietly, "exposing a family member's dishonor publicly is considered almost as shameful as the dishonor itself." "I understand that," Vanessa said. "And I'm asking you to do it anyway. Because truth doesn't stop being true because it's inconvenient for the people it touches." He turned from the window and looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll go to my father tonight." He did. And buried inside the discovery documents she had filed 3 weeks earlier and nearly forgotten about, a motion she had submitted almost procedurally, more out of legal thoroughness than expectation, she found something that made her breath stop. An internal memo from the opposing legal team's own files, dated 4 months before the lawsuit was filed. It outlined, in precise corporate language, a strategy to introduce fabricated evidence during trial, targeting the defense counsel's access credentials, designed specifically to create grounds for disbarment and case dismissal. They had built the trap before Vanessa was even hired. She read it again. They didn't fabricate evidence to defeat her. They designed their entire strategy around the assumption that a black civil rights lawyer defending a Korean corporation would be the easiest target to destroy. She had never been a coincidence to them. She had always been the plan. Strong women recognize strong women. Afro Korean Storytime is where you find stories for such women. Back in the courtroom, Vanessa had 13 minutes left. She pulled the memo from the stack, the one dated 4 months before the lawsuit, the one that outlined exactly how they intended to use fabricated credentials to remove her from the case. She set it on the table in front of her and pressed her fingertip against it like she was anchoring herself to it. Then she looked up at the clock. She needed the server logs Daniel had gone to retrieve this morning before the session started. Without them, the memo was compelling but incomplete. With them, it was a demolition. She didn't know yet if he had them. She kept reading. 3 weeks earlier, the confrontation between Daniel and Ji-ho had happened in Daniel's office on a Thursday evening when the rest of the floor was empty. Daniel had asked Ji-ho to come in and close the door, and the way he said it, quiet, direct, without the usual softening, had told Ji-ho everything before a single word of substance was spoken. Ji-ho sat down. He was composed. He had always been composed, which Vanessa had noted in her early assessment of the board and flagged as worth paying attention to. Composed people in crisis are either innocent or very well prepared. Daniel laid the financial records on the desk between them. Ji-ho looked at them. For a moment, Vanessa wasn't in the room. It was just two men from the same family and a truth that had run out of places to hide. Ji-ho denied it for less than 2 minutes. The denial was brief and almost mechanical, like a door being locked out of habit even though both people present know the room is already open. Then he stopped. What came next was not what Daniel expected. Ji-ho looked at the records, then at his cousin, and said, "I wanted to save it." Not with guilt. With the particular exhaustion of a man who had been carrying a conviction for a long time. He spoke about watching the company struggle across the last decade, about studying global market shifts and concluding, with genuine researched conviction, that the Park Group's traditional structure could not survive the next 20 years in its current form, about approaching the American investors not as a trader, but as a man trying to engineer a controlled transition before the market forced an ugly collapse. "I wanted father to have a dignified exit," he said, before someone else took the decision out of his hands. Daniel listened to all of it. Then, "You could have come to father with this." He would never have listened. "You know that." "Maybe," Daniel said, "but you didn't give him the chance. You made the decision for all of us, and you let someone else pay the price for it." Ji-ho had no answer. The silence between them was the kind that doesn't leave a room easily. Daniel brought everything to his father that same night. Chairman Park listened without interrupting. He sat in the chair behind his desk with his hands folded and his eyes steady while his nephew's betrayal was laid in front of him piece by piece. When Daniel finished, the old man was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I knew." Daniel went still. Not all of it. Not the specific financial mechanics. But the signs had been there. Ji-ho's absences, certain documents going quiet, a change in the young man's posture at board meetings that only someone watching very carefully over many years would catch. "Then why didn't you act?" Daniel said. Chairman Park looked at his son with the unhurried patience of a man who had long ago learned the difference between reacting and responding. "Because I needed to know who in this family would choose truth when the pressure came," he said. "Not who would choose truth when it was easy, when it cost nothing, when it was safe." He paused. "Now I know." Daniel stood in the silence of that answer for a moment. Then he asked, "And Vanessa?" Chairman Park's expression shifted, barely, almost imperceptibly. "She was always going to be the target," he said. "They told me that before I hired her. An American firm reached out through an intermediary. A warning. They said bringing an outsider, especially someone like her, would become a liability we couldn't manage." "And you hired her anyway?" I hired her because of that warning, he said. Anyone they were afraid of was exactly who I needed. Back in her hotel suite that night, Vanessa found the memo buried in the discovery documents. She read it once. Then she sat back in her chair and felt the full weight of what it meant pressed down on her chest. They had built the entire case around destroying her. Not defeating the Park Group. Destroying her specifically. Her credentials. Her reputation. Her right to stand in that courtroom. The email that was now being used against her had been planned before she had even boarded the plane to Seoul. She had been walking into a trap the entire time. And then, very quietly, in the stillness of a hotel room in a city that was never entirely hers, something settled in her. Not fear. Not anger. Clarity. Because they had planned this before she arrived, which meant they had studied her. And if they had studied her, they knew exactly what she was capable of. And they had still needed to cheat. She reached for her phone and called Daniel. I found something, she said. Get here now. And bring everything you have on Jiho's system access from the week my files were breached. Why? Because the email they're using against me wasn't built from nothing, she said. It was built from my credentials. And if we can show the court exactly when and how those credentials were harvested, before I submitted a single piece of evidence, Marsh's entire case doesn't just weaken. She looked at the memo. It becomes proof of the conspiracy itself. Daniel came back through that courtroom door like a man who had just been handed a weapon and told exactly where to aim it. He walked straight to Vanessa. Didn't look at the judge. Didn't look at Marsh. Didn't look at the board row where men who had spent 3 months doubting her were now watching with the particular attention of people who had bet on the wrong outcome and were beginning to feel it. He set the briefcase on the table beside her and leaned close enough that only she could hear him. Server logs. Bank records. And something else you need to see before you stand up. She didn't react visibly. She opened the briefcase and looked at what was inside. The something else was a signed statement. Jiho's. She looked up at Daniel. He said nothing. His jaw was tight and his eyes were steady, and she understood without asking that whatever had happened in that hallway had cost him something real. She had 12 minutes left. She started reading. The night before the trial, Daniel had gone to Jiho's apartment alone. He hadn't told Vanessa. He hadn't told his father. He had taken a car across Seoul at 11 o'clock at night because he had decided that some things needed to happen between family before they happened in front of the world. Jiho answered the door already knowing. You could see it in his posture, the absence of surprise, the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting for a knock he knew was coming. Daniel came in. He didn't sit down. He laid the financial records on the kitchen counter and said, "The trial starts in 9 hours. Whatever you decide tonight shapes everything that happens after." Jiho looked at the records without touching them. "If I sign a statement," he said slowly, "my name is finished in this industry. In this country." "Yes," Daniel said. "My mother will hear about this." "Yes." Jiho turned away and stood at the window for a long time, looking out at a city that had been built partly by the family he had quietly been selling. "Do you hate me?" he asked. Daniel thought about it honestly. The way people raised in families where honesty is rationed only allow themselves to do in private. "I don't know yet," he said. "But I know that you still have one choice left that means something. Everything before tonight, that's already done. This is the only thing left that you can own." Jiho didn't speak for a long time. Then he walked to the counter, picked up a pen, and signed. Back in the courtroom, Marsh was pressing the judge for a decision. His voice had the carefully managed urgency of a man who understood that time was the one thing he couldn't control. He had built this moment over months. He needed it to land before anything could interrupt the architecture of it. The judge looked at the clock. Then at Vanessa. She stood up. She addressed the court without a tremor in her voice. She said she had a signed statement from a board executive with direct knowledge of the conspiracy. She had financial records documenting 14 months of covert transfers. She had server logs from Park Group's internal system confirming a remote breach of her credentials during the specific week the forged email's metadata had been harvested. And she had a pre-trial memo from the opposing legal team's own files, obtained through standard discovery, outlining the fabrication strategy by name, for months before the lawsuit was ever filed. The courtroom was very quiet. Marsh stood up. His objection was technically precise and delivered with the full force of his considerable skill. But he was reacting now, and everyone in the room could hear the difference. The judge called a 2-hour recess. Vanessa sat down and pressed both palms flat on the table and breathed. Daniel sat beside her. Not across from her. Beside her. The first time in 3 months he had chosen that particular side of the table. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. If you've ever had to stand alone to protect your dignity, this channel is made for you. Subscribe and stay close. The recess ended and the judge came back with something different in his bearing. Not warmth. Not sympathy. Just the particular gravity of a man who had spent 2 hours reading documents that had rearranged his understanding of everything that had happened in his courtroom. He set his papers down. He looked at Gerald Marsh, and he said, "Counsel, I have significant concerns about the provenance of the evidence submitted by your team." That was the beginning of the end for Marsh. Not dramatic. Not sudden. Just a door closing quietly on a room he had spent months building. 2 weeks before the trial, Chairman Park had invited Vanessa to his home for tea. Not the office. Not a restaurant. His home, a quiet, traditional house behind a garden wall in a residential neighborhood that surprised her when the car pulled up. She had expected something that announced its own importance. What she found was a place that had nothing to prove. He opened the door himself. He led her through a hallway lined with photographs, not of boardrooms or official ceremonies, but of workers, construction crews, factory floors, men and women in worn clothing standing in front of buildings that had not yet been finished. The kind of photographs that say, "I remember where this came from." He served the tea himself, which she understood was not a small gesture. He spoke about rebuilding after the war, about starting with nothing in a country that was also starting with nothing, about walking into rooms in the early years where men with money and power looked at him the way men with money and power look at people they have already discounted, with a particular brand of patience that is really just contempt wearing good manners. "I know that look," Vanessa said. "I thought you might," he said. He wrapped both hands around his cup and looked at the garden through the window. "Money builds companies," he said. "Respect builds legacies. I spent 30 years learning that those are not the same project." She looked at him. "Why did you hire me?" Knowing what they would do with it. He was quiet for a moment. "Because they told me not to," he said simply. "An intermediary reached out before you were hired. A warning. They said bringing someone like you into a Korean corporate proceeding would become a liability. That the optics would work against the company." He paused. "I hired you the next morning." Vanessa set down her cup. "Anyone they were afraid of," he said, "was exactly who I needed standing in that courtroom." She sat with that for a long moment. Then she said, "Your son is a good man." Something moved across the old man's face, not surprise, but the particular expression of a father hearing something about his child that he already believed but needed to hear from someone outside the family to fully trust. "He is becoming one," Chairman Park said. "There is a difference." Walking back through the garden toward the waiting car, Vanessa felt something she hadn't felt since arriving in Seoul. Not confidence. She had always had that. Something quieter. The feeling of being seen not as a variable, not as a strategy, not as a symbol, but as a person whose presence had been chosen deliberately and with full understanding of the cost. She was almost at the car when her phone rang. Daniel. His voice was controlled, but she caught the edge beneath it, the sound she had learned to read over 3 months of watching him manage things he wasn't supposed to feel. The American investment group had retained a Korean PR firm. In the past 48 hours, they had placed stories in 3 major Korean business publications. The stories framed Vanessa's involvement as an attempt by American civil rights activists to interfere in Korean corporate sovereignty. They used language designed to inflame nationalist sentiment. They were built to make it politically costly for any Korean institution, including the court, to be seen backing her. "They're not just coming for me in the courtroom anymore," Vanessa said. "No," Daniel said. "They're trying to make you the story so the actual story disappears." She looked back at the house, at the garden wall, at the ordinary, quiet exterior of a place that had survived things far larger than this. "Let them," she said. "Vanessa. Let them make me the story," she said. "Because if they're busy building a case against me in the press, they're not watching what we're building in that courtroom." A pause. "You already have something," he said. It wasn't a question. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow is going to be long." She hung up. She didn't sleep at all. The judge's ruling came down like something that had been building pressure for a long time and finally found its release. The email was excluded. The accusation against Vanessa was formally dismissed. The conduct of the opposing legal team was referred for review by the Korean Bar Association and, given the involvement of American attorneys, to the relevant American regulatory bodies. Marsh stood very still when the ruling was read. His team moved around him in quiet, controlled damage management, low voices, closed laptops, the careful choreography of professionals absorbing a loss they had not fully prepared for. But Marsh himself didn't move. He stood at the front of that courtroom and stared at a point in the middle distance with the expression of a man recalculating something significant. Vanessa watched him. She did not allow herself to feel triumph. Not yet. Not here. The ruling was right, but it had not been inevitable. It had been built, piece by piece, across 3 months of work and risk and sustained refusal to be diminished. Triumph could wait. Right now she just wanted to stand in the fact of it. The night before the verdict, Vanessa had done something she almost never did. She called her mother. It was late in Chicago, past midnight there, but her mother picked up on the second ring the way she always did, as if some part of her was always half awake and waiting. Vanessa didn't explain everything. She gave her mother the outline. A big case, a lot of pressure, people who had tried to take her down in front of a full courtroom. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Did you stay standing?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then you already won," her mother said. "Everything else is just paperwork." Vanessa had laughed, a real laugh, the kind that releases something, and her mother had laughed too, and for a few minutes they were just 2 women on opposite sides of the world talking the way women talk when they love each other and understand that some fights are passed down like inheritance. After she hung up, Vanessa had sat in the dark for a while. She thought about Marcus Webb back in Chicago, still waiting on a verdict in a case that would never make international headlines but would matter entirely to the life of one man and his 2 daughters. She thought about the first morning she had arrived at Park Group headquarters and felt the boardroom silence press against her like a hand on her chest. She thought about Daniel on an airplane over the Pacific, speaking into the dark about his father's legacy like a man who had been holding that weight alone for a long time. She had come here for truth. That was still true. But somewhere in the last 3 months, the truth had expanded. It had faces now. It had weight and texture and consequence that extended well beyond a verdict. In the courtroom, the ruling finished landing. And then the rear door opened. Chairman Park walked in. He moved slowly, with the unhurried pace of a man who had never needed to arrive dramatically because his presence was always felt before it was seen. He walked down the center aisle without looking at the board row, without looking at the gallery, without acknowledging the cameras that turned toward him like flowers toward light. He walked to the defense table. He stopped in front of Vanessa. The room was completely still, the particular stillness that happens when people understand they are watching something they will remember. He bowed. Not the shallow professional nod of corporate courtesy. A real bow, slow, deliberate, the kind that in Korean culture carries the full weight of genuine respect offered freely from one person of substance to another. An elder bowing to someone younger. A chairman bowing to a lawyer. A Korean man bowing to a Black American woman in a room full of people who had spent months suggesting she had no right to be there. When he straightened, his face held the same quiet dignity it always held. But his eyes were warm. Vanessa received it the way she received everything, without performance, without deflection. She simply met his gaze and held it, because it had been earned and she knew it, and the knowing was enough. What she didn't know in that moment was that Daniel was watching from the side of the room, and that he was already trying to figure out how to tell her something he had been carrying since the night before the trial. Something that had nothing to do with the case, and everything to do with the fact that she was booked on a flight home in 36 hours. If you're a woman who believes respect is worth more than money, Afro Korean Storytime is the place for you. These are the stories we tell here. The conspiracy collapsed the way well-constructed lies always eventually collapse, not all at once, but in sequence, each piece pulling the next one down. In the weeks following the ruling, the architecture of what the American investment group had built became fully visible. The pre-trial fabrication memo was entered into the formal record. The financial transfers connecting Ji-ho's holding company to the investment group were documented and verified. 3 of the group's principals faced regulatory action in both the United States and South Korea. Gerald Marsh's conduct was referred for formal disciplinary review by 2 separate bar associations. The press coverage shifted the way tides shift, slowly, then entirely. The same Korean business publications that had run the stories questioning Vanessa's right to be involved in the case now ran detailed investigations into the conspiracy itself. The narrative changed. Not because anyone apologized. No one apologized. The narrative changed because the facts made the previous narrative unsustainable. That was how it usually worked. Vanessa had learned not to wait for apologies. Ji-ho resigned from the Park Group board on a Wednesday morning, in a statement that was brief and offered no public explanation. Chairman Park did not pursue criminal charges. When Daniel pressed him on the decision, carefully, respectfully, in the way he had learned to press his father on things that mattered, the old man thought about it for a long moment. Then he said, Ji-ho believed he was saving the company. He was wrong about the method, and wrong about the right to make that choice for all of us. But the intention was not cruelty. He paused. A man who acts from love, even badly, is not the same as a man who acts from greed. Justice and punishment are not always the same response. Daniel sat with that. He still caused real damage, Daniel said. Yes, his father said. And he will carry it. That kind of weight doesn't leave a person. I have watched people carry it for 50 years. He looked at his son. Sometimes that is the more complete consequence. The Park Group offered Vanessa a senior advisory position. The call came from the board, a formal offer, delivered through the firm that had first contacted her in Chicago. The role came with authority, a platform, and a compensation package that would have represented a complete transformation of her professional life. She thought about it for one evening. She sat in her hotel room, the same desk, the same lamp, the same view of Seoul that had become familiar over 3 months in a way she hadn't expected, and she thought about it honestly. It was a meaningful offer. It was not a bribe, and it was not flattery. It was the Park Group saying, in the language that institutions speak, that they understood what she had done and wanted her to stay. She appreciated that. Then she thought about Marcus Webb. His case had settled while she was in Seoul, a quiet, undramatic resolution that meant he kept his record clean and received a modest settlement. It wasn't a victory that would make anyone's news feed. But Marcus had called her assistant and left a message. Tell her thank you. Tell her my girls saw their dad win something. She thought about that message for a long time. Then she called the board and declined. Chairman Park received her refusal in person, which she had asked for because she owed him that. She told him she had come to do a specific job. She had done it. Her work was in Chicago, with clients who needed someone in their corner who was not going to leave. He listened without trying to change her mind. He had the rare quality of a man who respected a decision that cost him something without needing to argue against it. Some people inherit power, he said when she finished. You earned respect. Those are very different things. Very few people understand the difference. He extended his hand. She shook it, and for just a moment, brief enough that she almost wasn't sure it happened, he held the handshake a beat longer than protocol required. Like he was saying something that didn't have words yet. She found Daniel outside the building afterward. He was standing on the steps, hands in his pockets, looking at nothing in particular the way people look at nothing when they are thinking about something specific. He told me you turned it down, Daniel said. Word travels fast. In this family it does. He looked at her. I want to ask you something and I need you to answer it honestly. When have I not? Something close to a smile crossed his face. It was a real one, not the managed expressions she had catalogued across 3 months of board meetings and strategy sessions, but the kind that happens when a person forgets to control it. Was any of this worth it? He asked. Not for the company. For you. She looked at him for a long moment. Ask me at the airport, she said. He nodded slowly, and she walked back inside, because she still had a flight to pack for. She almost missed the flight. Not because of traffic or logistics. Because of a conversation that started in the departures hall of Incheon Airport and kept going past the point where she should have walked through the gate. Daniel had found out her flight time. She hadn't told him. She chose not to ask how he knew because some things are better received than interrogated. He was there when she arrived, standing near the entrance with no luggage and no particular attempt to look casual, because Daniel Park had never been very good at casual and had apparently stopped trying. 3 days before her flight, something had shifted between them that had nothing to do with the case. The case was over. The papers were filed. The verdict was recorded. The machinery of it had stopped, and what was left was just 2 people in a city that had been the setting for something significant, without the significance to organize themselves around anymore. Daniel had taken her to dinner. Not a business dinner. A real one, a small restaurant near his neighborhood that he described as the place he went when he didn't want to be recognized, which told her more about his daily life than anything he had said in 3 months of professional proximity. The food came in small dishes, banchan arranged across the table with the kind of quiet abundance that Korean hospitality delivers without announcement. He talked her through what each dish was without making a production of it, the way you explain things to someone you want to actually understand rather than someone you're performing knowledge for. She told him about the first time her mother had cooked for a Korean colleague of her father's, decades ago, a dinner that had turned into a 4-hour cultural exchange over a table crowded with both jollof rice and japchae, 2 women communicating almost entirely through feeding each other. Daniel had laughed. Really laughed. She filed it away, the particular surprise of hearing him do that, the way it changed the landscape of his face, because she was the kind of person who noticed things she wasn't sure what to do with yet. At the airport, they stood in the departures hall while the ordinary machinery of transit moved around them. Announcements. Luggage wheels. The specific anonymity of a space designed to be passed through rather than inhabited. He looked at her. She waited. I owe you something I haven't said correctly yet, he said. You don't owe me anything. Not as a client, he said. As a person. He took a breath. The careful breath of a man who has been precise with language his entire life and is about to say something that precision cannot fully carry. You walked into this family when it was fracturing. You didn't try to fix the fracture. You just kept telling the truth until the fracture revealed what was actually worth saving. He paused. That changed something. In my father. In me. I want you to know that. Vanessa looked at him for a long moment. You changed something too, she said. You chose truth when it cost you your cousin, your board's approval, and 3 months of sleep. That's not nothing. It didn't feel like courage, he said. It felt like not having another option. That's usually what courage feels like, she said. A beat. Take care of him, she said. She meant the chairman. I will. He looked at her. Take care of yourself. Not just your clients. You. She picked up her bag. I always do, she said. She walked toward the gate. She didn't look back. Not because she didn't want to, but because she was exactly the person she had always been, and that person moved forward. At the gate, she paused once, just briefly, her hand resting on the edge of the entrance, and looked back at the departures hall. He was still there. Still watching. She held that for exactly 1 moment. Then she walked through. If you've ever walked away from something that mattered, not because you wanted to, but because it was the right thing, this channel understands that. Subscribe and stay close. There are more stories like this coming. Marcus Webb was waiting outside her office when she got back. Not because he needed anything. His case was settled. His record was clean. His daughters were fine. He was just there, standing on the sidewalk on a cold Chicago morning with a brown paper bag that turned out to contain coffee and 2 pastries from the bakery on the corner, because someone had told him what time her flight landed and he had done the math. Vanessa stopped when she saw him. You didn't have to do this, she said. I know, he said. That's why I did it. She took the coffee. They stood on the sidewalk for a few minutes, not saying much. The city moved around them. Buses, pedestrians, the specific morning energy of Chicago in early winter. It was loud and cold and completely ordinary, and it was hers, and she felt the belonging of it settle back around her like something she hadn't realized she'd missed until she was standing inside it again. 3 days after she landed, a package arrived from Seoul. No return address, but the handwriting on the outer envelope was precise and unhurried in a way she recognized immediately. Inside was a small photograph, black and white, old, the kind that has been handled enough times to soften at the edges. A young man standing in front of a building still under construction, wearing work clothes, looking directly at the camera with an expression that contained no apology for where he was or what he was doing. Chairman Park. Decades younger. On the back, in careful English, the building doesn't care who builds it. But the people inside it should. S.J. Park. Vanessa held it for a long time. She set it on her desk, propped against the small stack of case files she had come back to. She looked at it while she worked. Not constantly, just sometimes, the way you look at something that reminds you of the specific kind of fight that is worth having. 2 weeks later, Daniel called. Not about the company. Not about the case. Not about anything that required a conversation. He said he was in New York for a board meeting. He said it was only a few hours from Chicago. He said he was not sure what he was suggesting exactly, but that he had thought about the dinner near his neighborhood, and the airport, and the way she had looked back once before walking through the gate, and he had decided that precise language could only carry a person so far before you had to say the unclear thing out loud and let it be unclear. Vanessa leaned back in her chair. Outside her window, Chicago was doing what it always did, indifferent, alive, fully itself. New York is not a few hours from Chicago, she said. No, he admitted. It's not. You flew to New York, she said, to call me from a few hours away. A pause. Yes, he said. She looked at the photograph on her desk. At the young man who had built something from nothing in a world that had not been waiting for him. At the note on the back. She thought about what Chairman Park had said to her the first night she had glimpsed him clearly, My company was built in rooms where people believed I did not belong, and she thought about the fact that the most lasting things are rarely built in easy rooms. I'm coming to New York next month, she said. For a conference. I know, he said. And then, with the quiet honesty that had become the truest thing about him, I looked it up. She laughed. He laughed too. And somewhere in that specific exchange, two people laughing across a distance that was already shorter than it looked, something that had been left open at an airport gate in Seoul quietly, undramatically, began to close. In Chicago, in a small office on the south side of the city, Vanessa Coleman put down her phone and picked up the next case file. A 27-year-old nurse. Wrongful termination. Discrimination complaint ignored by HR. A woman who had sent 3 emails asking for help before she found Vanessa's number on a community board in her church. Vanessa read the first page. Then the second. She reached for a yellow notepad and wrote the woman's name at the top and underlined it twice. Because that was who she was. Not the lawyer who had survived a Seoul courtroom. Not the woman a powerful chairman had bowed to in front of the international press. Not the person who had walked away from a life-changing offer and a man who was already looking up her conference schedule. She was the lawyer who picked up the next file. She was the woman who showed up for the people in the room with the least power, every time, without requiring the room to deserve her first. Dignity doesn't ask permission to enter. It doesn't negotiate for its right to stand. It just stands. And somewhere right now, another woman is standing alone in a room full of people who have already decided she doesn't belong there. She belongs there. She always did. And one day, maybe not today, maybe not in a courtroom in Seoul, maybe in a small claims court in Chicago or a HR office in Detroit or a conference room in Atlanta, the most powerful person in that room is going to stop and show her exactly what respect looks like when it's real. This channel exists for the women who keep standing. If that's you, you're exactly who these stories are made for. Thank you for watching Afro Korean Storytime. As we come to the end of this story, I want to share something with the women watching. Many of you have faced moments like this. Moments when you had to stand on your own. Moments when you chose dignity instead of the easier path. Moments when you refused to be silenced, controlled, or pushed aside. That kind of strength is often quiet, but it has the power to change the entire room. If you are a woman who believes respect is more valuable than money, if you believe character still matters, if you believe dignity should never be something you compromise, then this channel was created with you in mind. Here, I tell stories about women who stand their ground, women who earn respect without asking for it, women who remind even the most powerful people that integrity cannot be bought. If this message resonates with you, I invite you to subscribe and become part of this community. And if this story meant something to you, write the word dignity in the comments below. I read your comments, and they help these stories reach more women who need to hear them. Until our next story, remember, not every powerful person chooses honor, but every strong woman carries it within herself. I'll see you in the next one.